'Twas the night before the House rose, and all through that house, Doug Routley was screaming at BC Liberal MLAs allegedly. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the BC Poly Hot Stove. I am Jordan Bateman, safely in Burnaby, British Columbia, where I rep the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, also known on Facebook as that evil anti-union lobby group, apparently, if I'm reading my Twitter mentions correctly. And joined as always by...
I'm Maclean K. I'm in Slings and Arrows Central here in the legislature, where, as you mentioned, things are definitely heating up with, we're a little more than 24 hours away from everyone getting to go home for the summer.
Oh boy, and I bet you they are just pining to do it. That Pacific buffet on the 7 o'clock ferry ride tomorrow night is going to be jam-packed with MLAs unwinding. Are they serving liquor yet in that?
No, June 1st. They're going to just miss it.
Those poor MLAs slaving away for you 48 hours before liquor becomes real on the Pacific Buffet. All right. Well, this is the Hot Stove. It's where we talk about the big political issues of the day, the ones that affect British Columbians. Maclean is in the legislature, of course. He is the editor-in-chief of the Orca and is doing a fantastic job sorting it all out for us. But Maclean, your top issue, the top issue of this hour, are we going to see a summer cabinet shuffle?
You know, I think we are for a couple of reasons, and the first of which is the most innocuous, is that they're kind of due for one. I mean, we're 2 years into what would ordinarily be a 4-year mandate, and governments usually do at least a minor shuffle about midway through. The one way of moving ministers who are having troubles in files, it's a good way of burying the bodies, because now new ministers can come in and say, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. And so even if John Horgan had a solid cabinet full of star performers, I think we would be due for a shuffle. But he doesn't have a solid cabinet full of star performers. That's not to say some of them haven't performed well, but he does have, I think, 2 problem spots in particular in transportation with Claire Trevena and with citizen services with Jinny Sims. Claire Trevena's struggles have been well documented. We've talked about them a lot on this show, and I suspect we will again later today. And the George Massey tunnel replacement project in particular has been an ongoing throbbing sore spot for the NDP. Jinny Sims, this is an issue that doesn't seem to want to go away. The NDP had a lawyer write a very vaguely threatening letter to her former CA, who is alleging that she well, a lot of allegations, and almost too many to go into here, but the most relevant is that she was being directed to contravene FOI laws. The Liberals actually have screenshots of WhatsApp groups indicating that at the very least looks like that was happening. And there are rumors that there is more evidence to be unearthed in the near future. So this is also Minister Sims' second strike. She had to apologize for using private email last year. So I just don't see how the Premier doesn't bow to sort of internal and external pressure and does a little bit of shuffling of deck chairs this summer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he also has 3 contenders on the outside looking in who I think he would like to see in cabinet. Sheila Malcolmson, who took a big risk for him running in that Nanaimo by-election. The mother of all by-elections? What did we brand that?
The mother of all by-elections.
How soon I forget. The mother of all by-elections, TM. I think he wants to reward her, and certainly shuffling out Claire Trevena. They're opening it up for another island politician to shuffle in. I think he wants to reward Bowen Ma. I think she's in a must-hold riding for them. It's a swing riding. By no means is she safe. And I think that he'd like to put her into cabinet. And I wouldn't be surprised if Ravi Kahlon was another one. Again, another must-win riding. If he's shuffling out someone south of the Fraser, maybe he shuffles in Ravi Kahlon to kind of balance that out.
Well, and you're also assuming, we all are, that this is going to be a zero-sum game. It might not be. I mean, cabinets can expand. It does happen.
Everybody's in cabinet. You only have 40 MLAs. Put them all in.
Well, why not? Everyone seems to think that shuffling Jinny Sims, just to use her as an example, means that she'll be a backbencher right away. I would be surprised if that happened. It's too clear a demotion. You're more likely to see her become the Minister of State for, something. And then you're right. I think you're right about the 3 contenders from the backbenches who, if cabinet either members are replaced or if it's expanded, I think your 3 predictions are bang on, actually.
Yeah, it just seems to me that that's kind of those are important seats for sure. The other option is, of course, there might be MLAs who aren't going to run again in 2021. I once overheard Harry Baines on a ferry telling a political aide that Shane Simpson wouldn't be running again. You wonder if Shane knows that, number one. And number two, you wonder if there might be a couple like that who slowly start working their way out of cabinet. Although I would say this. Your pension is based on your 3 best years of earnings within government. So being a cabinet minister 3 years certainly does add to your pensionable bottom line over 2 years, because that is a $50,000 difference there in that 3rd year. So just throwing that out there, I think even if you're not planning to run again in 2021, you're probably maybe fudging a little with the premier, I'm still deciding, or you're staying quiet so that you can stay in cabinet.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, normally, again, if this was a solid, stable majority government, I don't think right about now is about the time the parties would even start thinking about locking down who was going to run again. But this is not a solid, stable majority government. There has always been at least the plausible threat that something might happen and we might have an early election. So I know that all 3 parties are at least in some state of election readiness. And so I think that some of those conversations probably have started. I mean, even a year ago. So yeah, there are probably, in fact, we know there are people in all 3 parties that don't plan as of now to run again. And I mean, this isn't always a bad thing. This is an incredibly demanding job, and I'm a firm believer that when a politician says that they would rather spend, not spend 60 hours a week working in a very public job that takes them away from their family, that occasionally we should, take them at face value.
Oh wow, you're so naive. Liberals sent out a fundraising email this week from Rich Coleman, noting it was his 23rd anniversary in the House. And as I'm reading through, I'm like, crap, is he resigning here? Is that what's going on right now? But no. It was just look at all the great work we've done over 23 years. Let's make a donation to the party. So, but certainly you've got a lot of politicians on both sides of the House thinking about what they want to do with the rest of their lives.
And I suspect the results of the federal election will play into some of that decision-making process as well, because there will be some some opportunities that may arise on the federal scene or that may disappear on the federal scene that will answer at least some of these questions.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. So cabinet shuffle, Maclean says, mark it down. John Horgan's shuffling the cabinet this summer. Let's talk about my top issue, and this is actually good news for the construction sector and good news for those of us who want fairness in labor relations. The BC Greens and the BC Liberals combined yesterday to amend the controversial labor code changes proposed by the NDP and essentially take it back to what the expert panel recommended, rather than skewing it to the construction unions on a couple of key points. This is, I think, by my count, maybe only the 2nd amendment that these 2 parties have gotten together on.
I think that's right.
What was the other one? They defeated...
oh, man.
I forget. Certainly secret ballot. Like, look, the reason there is still secret ballot is because these 2 parties combined to say no way. But essentially, the labor code was being skewed in a way where certain unions in the construction sector only could be raided every single summer. And raided means another union comes in and tries to organize the members of that first union in order to move from that one union to them. And that, of course, was CLAC, also the Canada West Construction Union, progressive unions that don't fit within the traditional building trades model because, well, they don't give money to the NDP. And, they're different. They're cutting into the other guy's business. And if you're the iron workers or the UA or any of those groups, you're constantly trying to get in and get those workers to come over to you. The expert report said, look, it should be every 3 years, like every other industry. You should have that opportunity to raid. Okay, maybe you can move it to the summer instead of months 7 and 8 of a contract because, what if months 7 and 8 are December and January or something ridiculous like that? It'd be awfully hard to raid. NDP went too far. Harry Baines, trying as a sop to the building trades unions after having to abandon the secret ballot, made these suggested changes. And the Greens and Liberals, who, let's face it, have been fighting hammer and tongs for 2 years. I've had dinner with Andrew Weaver and heard him, chew out the Liberals and call them essentially big babies who need to grow up and learn how to be in opposition. And that's probably nicer than anything I've ever heard a Liberal say about Andrew Weaver. So, it goes both ways. They managed to kind of bury the hatchet here and do what's right for BC and for these workers who don't want to be raided every single year and essentially have their most important building season opened up to construction, basically a union campaign.
Well, and you raise a really good point because, I mean, from the NDP's point of view, the calculus of why they were doing this, to them seems obvious. They needed to give their sort of, if you like, in-house building trades unions a bit of a cupcake after they weren't going to be able to get the card check instead of a secret ballot. And so this was something that they thought was going to be beneficial to them. But if you're not in that realm, explaining why construction is different than literally every other sector in this province is kind of a tough sell. They would say, well, the jobs aren't always complete within the terms of a contract. Well, okay, but that doesn't mean you can't. There are other ways to go and talk the men and women in the union you're trying to raid. It's one of those things that, I mean, for a guy like Andrew Weaver to look at and say, show me the reason why we're doing this, and the NDP couldn't really point to a good one. It just seemed like an obvious.
But they gave us $2.5 million, Andrew. Yeah. That's the money. Yeah, Harry Baines can't exactly say that.
So in the meantime, let's credit where credit is due. Yeah. We have criticized Weaver and the Greens for going along with some pretty bad ideas like the speculation tax. We still haven't forgotten about that, Dr. Weaver. But in this case, he looked at the evidence before him and said, yeah, this does not hold water.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And, hopefully this kind of bodes well for the fall session. Maybe these two parties can get together and make other legislation better or fairer. It's tough. It's tough because I don't think there's any good lines of communications between the two parties. You have a built-in government taxpayer-funded secretariat managing the relationship between the Greens and the NDP, but you don't have any kind of similar thing for the opposition and the Greens. And there was so much, the people, of course, the closer you were to Andrew Weaver before that last election, the more hurt and personally, the more distance there is between you now. After he decided to go with the NDP and not with the BC Liberals. So, it'll be interesting to see. It's a good sign. And listen, considering the NDP have the levers of power for ICBA here to escape with both the secret ballot and construction being treated like other industries, that's a huge win for our advocacy efforts. And congratulations to CLAC and CWU, who I knew were very active in trying to make their case to Dr. Weaver and the Greens. You've done good there, CLAC. So. CLAC represents workers at Site C. They've been raided. The workers stuck with CLAC rather than go to the building trades unions. So, but if it happens every single year, eventually fatigue sets in, and maybe at some point, these workers say, "Screw it, let's just do it and get it over with." So you want to make sure that the right thing is being done, and it sounds like this legislation it finally has been, whether Harry Baines likes it or not.
And as somebody who's not from the realm of construction, I'm always struck by how the word raid is used so blithely. To me, raid sounds like a very violent term. So it always sounds odd to my ears. I know that that's the industry acceptable term, and I'm not implying anything. I'm saying coming from the outside, it always sounds
raid
fun.
And pillage us.
Right?
The nurses raided. I think it was the nurses raided health workers, or vice versa, the HAU, and those two unions still don't get along years later. Like in union land, raiding a union is really a terrible sin, unless it's CLAC because you hate their guts.
It's amazing. The politics of unions in this is something that I don't think enough people understand the complexities. I mean, I've been working and covering government now for a long time, and I still don't understand all the various ins and outs. It's complicated and very interesting.
Exactly. All right, Maclean, on to the next thing. I know you want to talk about foreign money. Before you do, I would just like to say, if there's any foreign billionaires out there watching this and who want to stroke a check to ICBA, we'll be more than happy to take it and fight the good fight. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was a different message. Tell me, what's going on with foreign money?
Well, I mean, earlier this week, Andrew Wilkinson, and it was the leader, it wasn't another member of the BC Liberals, introduced a private member's bill that would, in their words, ban foreign money from influencing provincial elections. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, it's probably because you've been paying attention to what's going on in Alberta. Not only do the governing Conservatives there want to ban foreign money, they want to have an inquiry into the role that it has played. Now, here's the thing. I think this is inevitable in this province, banning foreign money in our elections, because there really isn't a good argument for it. for keeping it. A lot of the arguments that are going to be trotted out to preserve any role for foreign money in NGOs and political parties were just as valid when we were talking about big corporate donations from BC individuals and companies, free speech, wanting to get involved about issues they feel passionate about, et cetera, and so forth. There really isn't any difference. And in fact, even David Eby, who, as you well know, is one of the most partisan cabinet ministers the NDP have, he wouldn't dismiss this out of hand. He said, he got his shots in saying, they had 16 years, and it's always ironic when the BC Liberals talk about big money and so on and so forth, and fair enough. But he also said, I will look at it. And there could well be things in there for us to learn. And he's a smart enough guy to know that he can't just say, who cares about foreign money? The problem a lot of these NGOs have is that they have explicitly bragged in the past that they have influenced elections. Dogwood in particular has said that they managed to defeat several conservative candidates. I've forgotten the number, but it's a long one. It's a big one, rather, in the last federal election, and were active in the last several provincial elections. Now, you can't claim, Conservative or any other party's scalps and then say, well, really, the money doesn't make any difference. It just simply doesn't add up.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think, was it Lead Now who actually signed people up in the Christy Clark leadership campaign to defeat
That's right.
Falcon, going back a few years. Holy smokes, going back 8 years now. It is, it is funny. It's the Vivian Krausification of our politics where, you got to hand it like Vivian Krause gets involved in this file, doggedly blogs away, spends years being ridiculed and mocked and ignored and criticized when she wasn't ignored. And it turns out, guess what? She was right. And now we see Alberta moving on this. We see Ontario moving on this. We see maybe British Columbia moving on it. Pretty amazing, the effect. If you've ever doubted if one person can make a big difference in politics, Vivian Krause is your example as to why.
I could not agree more, and I will say it is somewhat amusing to see a lot of the same people who quite rightly point out and wring their hands about Russian interference in the last U.S. presidential election, and these are all very good points to make and things to be concerned about here in Canada. But then when it seems to be going from their point of view in the other direction, well, that's okay, that's fine.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, my back burner issue is CBA overruns. The first project under the John Horgan government's new union monopoly came in, and lo and behold, it's not 7% over budget. No, it's more like 35% over budget, and we don't even have a single shovel in the ground yet. So it's a small 2-lane expansion, expanding from 2 lane to 4 lanes, just for 2 kilometers east of Revelstoke. The budget originally was going to be about $35 million, then they said $50 million, and now the budget is $82 million. And the big key, the only thing that really has changed, as Vaughn Palmer pointed out in a recent piece, labor costs. The labor costs were so much more expensive. Labor costs were more expensive in Maclean, but also there were fewer bidders than normal. Like usually you get 10 to 12 bidders on these kind of projects. They got 5, and one person actually pulled their bid because they couldn't make the labor model work. So the companies, a lot of the companies that we normally do this work don't want to have to lay off their employees, have them go over to a Crown corporation and then be loaned back to them from a union hiring hall. So they are not bidding on these projects, and that's going to mean higher costs, not only on this 2 kilometers, but on the next 2 kilometers and on the 2 kilometers after that, all the way to the Alberta border. And later on, we're going to talk about the Massey Tunnel, but my theory is you want to know why we can't afford a Massey Tunnel right now? It's because we're overspending on labor on all of these other construction projects.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, in some ways, the NDP were either lucky or smart that this came out with, as you say, a project for, to expand a 2-kilometer section of road. Had this been for the entire stretch of the Trans-Canada to the Alberta border that still needs to be 4-laned, the number would be staggering and frightening. And if this was for the Pattullo Bridge, maybe even more so. So, I mean, if it's as exactly what you said, is if it can be this much of an overrun for a 2-kilometer stretch of road, just imagine what it is for the entire highway. This is an expensive policy, no matter else what you think about it.
And again, not a single shovel in the ground yet, so Lord only knows if the costs will go up. One thing I do want to point out is some work ICBA has done through the Freedom of Information Act, and we released it today. One of the big claims by the unions is that you've got to encourage and protect union work because unions are training all of the construction apprentices in this province. Well, we filed a Freedom of Information request with the government's Industry Training Authority to find out who exactly were sponsoring the trades apprentices in this province. And not surprising to us, but probably maybe surprising to people who were in construction in the 70s, it's the open shop companies, non-unions, sponsor 82% of the trades apprentices in this province. And when you come to some trades like welding, 96% of the welders' apprentices in this province work for open shop companies represented by groups like ICBA, not for unions. That includes even the progressive unions like CLAC and CWU, which will also cause the building trades to go apoplectic, that I would include them with them as a union. But yeah, 4-to-1 is the difference in apprenticeship training. Again, it's open shop companies, private companies who are out there recruiting, training, equipping, and sponsoring these apprentices. So you tell me, by taking work away from those 80%, how are you helping apprentices in this province?
I don't understand why the unions aren't doing more. I mean, I find this, it's disappointing, to hear this about the unions, that they're not doing their part.
Yeah, especially when you consider the fact, like, they take money with a baseball bat from people, right? Like, like, you're forced to pay union dues, you're forced to pay training dues. You've got companies and guys who are paying per hour to the union for things like training apprentices, but they're not training in the same numbers that we are. Part of it is they have an old-fashioned model. Like, it would be hard if you're a 20-year-old going into a trade. Why would you join a union school where everyone who has seniority over you gets the right to turn down work before it trickles down to you? Whereas if you're really good at what you do, you go to work for a private company, a non-union company, guess what? You get the first dibs on the work because it's about talent, not seniority. Gretzky gets the ice time, as the old saying used to go, right? Like, we don't care if you've been there a year, kid, or 25 years. If you're our best worker, you're going to get the best pay, you're going to get the best packages, you're going to get the best projects. That is the way of the world today, merit-based, not the way that unions like to operate.
Very well said.
I'm getting good at this construction stuff, Maclean.
you picked it up. Speaking of not the way the world is supposed to operate, can I talk about the hottest place in BC politics right now?
Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Here we go. Wait,
this is where we lose our PG designation, yes, folks. Brace yourselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this in the car with a child,
yeah,
you
perhaps
may want to pause for a moment and come back in a second, because
earmuffs.
We do have to use a dirty
earmuffs,
word.
Kids.
Yeah, okay.
So the last week of the House is always a little tense, and there have been a few incidents already where actually a pair of BC Liberal MLAs had to withdraw comments they had made. But earlier this week, the NDP, specifically Doug Routley, is alleged to have taken things to another level. Now, this is just 2 days ago, apparently, in a debate. It is alleged that Doug Routley said, and I warn you, not a chance, you fat fuck. And now this is in the legislature. Now,
wait.
Yes.
You can say that in the legislature, but you can't wear sleeves? I don't get it.
Isn't that, well, he apparently was, there is some debate over this, as you very well may imagine. The NDP are disputing whether or not he left voluntarily or was kicked out, and are in fact disputing whether or not he said it. Now, the problem is this is all recorded on Hansard audio. If you listen, and I have listened very closely, you can hear Mr. Routley clear as day saying, not a chance, and then somebody else speaks over him, and you can hear what sounds like you fat fuck in the background. There, I said it again. But what the NDP have said is that they have listened to it backwards and forwards, and Mr. Routley denies having said it, to be fair, and that what they're saying is that somebody else said, and I quote, "That's not a fact." So you hear Doug Routley saying, not a chance, and then somebody else says, that's not a fact, and it just sounds it's a very unfortunate coincidence. But of course he would never say that. Of course not. Yes. So right now, the poor people in Hansard who are trying to transcribe all this, that's the hottest place in BC right now.
So this is one of these points of privilege, is that it? And at some point,
that's it exactly.
He'll probably either have to recant or.
Well, yeah. If now it depends. If the NDP decide to go down swinging on this, they'll just continue to deny he ever said it. But the circumstantial evidence is fairly persuasive. Let's put it that way. This is a point of privilege. We're taping this on Wednesday morning. This was raised yesterday. The point of privilege will probably be resolved sometime this afternoon. So by the time you're listening to this may have been resolved. But as of right now, it is an open issue.
All right, follow at Maclean K on Twitter. He'll post the up to the second results. Two
Absolutely.
things. First of all, what does the member for Islamabad North think of that? Number one. And number two, does Doug Routley, is he kissing the butts of the unions with that mouth? Come on, Doug. That's not nice.
It's we have heard some fairly unparliamentary things in this legislature, but to my knowledge, no one has ever been called a fat fuck. There, I said it a third time. We're definitely losing our rating.
You know, you're really living the dream there, listening to Hansard audio recordings, trying to determine if they swore or not. Like, it's kids someday. Work hard, hustle, grow up. You'll be Maclean K listening to.
The best part of all this is, well, not the best part, but this is to give you a measure of how much interest there is in this. And I know I'm going over my time.
No, please. This is great.
Rob Shaw of the Vancouver Sun was good enough to clip that specific clip and then tweet it out. But he had to use Dropbox to do that. Or Google Drive, excuse me. And so this saved all the rest of us from having to go through the entire recording of Hansard. The problem is too many people tried to download it. And so the first few times I got an error message saying, try again tomorrow. Too many people have liked this. Rob didn't know this till this morning. I had the happy opportunity to tell him that he was just too popular for Twitter and Google Drive yesterday. So, I mean, you broke poor Rob's Dropbox, Doug, and there's people are paying people. I mean, who could not be amused by this story?
It's kind of depressing though, Maclean, because we don't break the internet when we record. More people will probably listen to that Dropbox clip than listen to Rob and Mike's show.
The only time we might break the internet is if we accidentally label our show Unspun with Jody Vance and George Affleck.
That is always a good plan. All right. My hot politician right now, Andrew Scheer, the Conservative leader, the man in the lead in the polls to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, finally gave a big policy speech on immigration. And Maclean, I thought it was thoughtful. I thought it was presented a good balance between a conservative view, protecting borders, and a generous Canadian spirit. And most importantly, he did what I think I encouraged him to do a few weeks ago in a piece in the Orca. He gave the soundbite that everyone was wanting on things like the alt-right, the hate movement, KKK, things like that. He said flat out, you're not welcome here. We don't want you here. Here's the door. Beat it, essentially. And I think that'll play well. It even caught the attention of Warren Kinsella, who, while no Trudeau fan, certainly is no Conservative fan, and certainly is, when it comes to the alt-right, very sensitive to that. Even he was applauding it. So kudos to Andrew Scheer. That's the kind of talk we want to hear from not just the Prime Minister, but frankly from any of our Canadian political leaders.
Oh, especially somebody who is, at the very least, one of a prohibitively small group of people who might be our next prime minister. I mean, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, but I think one of the areas where Scheer has been weak has been not speaking in terms of sound bites, not giving the media and indeed the social media public an easily digestible clip. And it sounds like he's finally done that.
Yeah, I wrote this. He's a thoughtful, earnest guy. And, I remember sitting at the Board of Trade and he was talking about these issues, but it was a 2-minute thing and it was clear he was saying beat it, but he didn't distill it into those 2 words that they can play over and over again. Well, this will go a long way to helping that. And it's a sign that he's maturing as a politician, I think.
Growing on the job as the best of them do.
Maclean, are we really saying that to mature as a politician, you have to talk in pithy sound bites rather than in long policy-ridden dissertations? What happened to us?
Hey, well, it's true though. I mean, it's 2019, and in fact, that's the clip that everyone is going to remember about Justin Trudeau. Yeah. I think in 20, 30, 40 years is the why is your cabinet gender also balanced?
Sorry. Oh, that's what I mean.
He gave them 2 words, and it was very effective.
Yeah, that's the gift people will remember. Sorry. I'm dancing like a crazy person, in case you're wondering, out there in the audio podcast world.
Just all right. Like
federal leaders, one of them is ice cold, and I can't believe you're calling out the great patron saint of greenism.
Well, I mean, it's not a great week for Elizabeth May. She has a caucus of 2, which is, I mean, doubling, and that was a huge accomplishment for them, winning in Nanaimo Ladysmith. But unfortunately, the reason Paul Manley was running for them and not the NDP is he wasn't allowed to, because he had made some pretty questionable comments about 9/11 and who was really responsible before. So anytime when you have to,
Bush, wasn't it?
But yeah.
Why do people say stupid stuff like this, Maclean?
I don't know.
On
I mean,
tape
there's
and
a
then run for
constituency
office.
that believes this kind of thing. But anyway, so that's not why Elizabeth May is having a bad week. Apparently, not apparently, because she has said so herself. She gave Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott the full court press to run with the Greens in the next federal election, and she even offered both of them somehow the leadership of the Green Party. And she has admitted this herself. This is not speculation. And so if you offer somebody your crown, the throne you sit on, and they still turn it down, obviously running for the Greens had absolutely zero appeal.
So rather than being the leader of a party, these two women have decided to run as independents and, make their, by all conventional wisdom, run much harder.
Well, I mean, we roll our eyes at independents, but I mean, really, independents have just as good a record of electoral success. In fact, probably much better than do the Greens in this country. Well,
it's true. Honorable members, no.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of indications that Green support is on the rise, and they've done well in provincial elections in the last couple of years, and all of this is true.
The EU. And don't forget the EU.
That's right, and then the EU. But federally, I mean, the Greens had less than 4% of the vote nationally in the last election. And so even if they double their vote, they're still going to be, at sub-Jagmeet Singh on his worst day levels. And so, I mean, it's not hard to see why Wilson-Raybould and Philpott said thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, absolutely true. I'm very curious to see what happens in these ridings. George Affleck on the Rick Clough show earlier, speaking of another podcast that's better than ours, Rick Clough and George Affleck talking about this issue. George thinks Jody could do it, although he also could convince himself that it may just be enough if a Conservative can pull 35, 38% of the vote, that might be enough to get them over the top as well. So that could be a very interesting riding to watch.
Yeah, one of the ones that I think is going to get the most national attention in the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that. All right, my cold politician is Premier John Horgan. So I'm going to take a little victory lap here, so pardon me for a moment. Last week, we had a little anniversary planned. We knew that May 23rd was the 60th anniversary. This is ICBA speaking, the 60th birthday of the Massey Tunnel opening to traffic. So for a long time, I'd had in my calendar, let's have a birthday party for the Massey Tunnel that day, and we'll make the politicians at least explain to the people of Delta why they have to celebrate the 60th anniversary by waiting 60 minutes extra in traffic. Conveniently, the NDP, unwittingly, decided that the 23rd was a perfect day to have John Horgan in Delta, which is even better for us because now, instead of whatever John Horgan wanted to talk about, which I think was, grants for cricket and things like that and hanging with Ravi, he would be asked about the Massey Tunnel because we were doing this event. Sure enough, global cameraman goes there, working with Jordan Armstrong on a story, gets clips of us doing the cake, goes over and asks John Horgan, hey, what's the status of the Massey Tunnel? John Horgan, inexplicably, countering exactly what his transportation minister told the public last week, which was, we're working on a business plan, we'll have it by the end of 2020. He's like, no, sooner than later, we're going to get this thing going right away. We think the feds are on board for some money, and it's also, by the way, we're going to twin the tunnel. All of which came as a mighty surprise to the bureaucrats who are the ones doing the work and the due diligence on this, where there is no twin tunnel option it's under consideration, but so are 5 other options. There is no federal money coming that anyone has ever heard of. And in fact, we have folks conveniently in Ottawa this week doing meetings. None of the federal Liberal politicians or deputy ministers we've talked to have any idea what the Premier is talking about when it comes to federal money for Massey. Massey Tunnel is going to be years and years and years away. And in fact, the option that John Horgan presents is the one that is the most environmentally problematic, because you not only have to repair the old tunnel and somehow get it up to modern day standards, but you're building a new tunnel, all of which is through the Fraser River and the very stringent environmental regulations there, whereas the bridge proposed by the Liberals only touched land and could avoid all of that. So all that to say, I think Premier Horgan was either fibbing or ad-libbing. He got caught out. He didn't know the file well. I don't know who in the NDP thought it was a good idea to send the Premier into Delta without some sort of hey, just remember, we're working on the business plan for the Massey and it'll be done by the end of 2020. And there was none of that. If you're a driver in the South Fraser waiting in line at the tunnel, this has got to be infuriating, because less than a week after the Premier is saying, any day now, we're on this, you have Von Palmer writing, yeah, they're not on this.
And we've pointed this out before, but as strong as Horgan has been in terms of communications, this is not the first time that he has not been on the same page as one of his ministries. Last fall, I myself asked him about the the employer's health tax.
Right.
And driving up property tax rates in municipalities, and why wasn't that just downloading costs to cities when we're trying to do more for affordability in this city? And he said, you know what, you're right. He said those words, and we'll have to take a look at that. Carol James said, no. That's not happening. Yep. So I mean, at the time it was kind of almost an isolated anecdote, but I mean, this is not the first time that the Premier and one of his ministers have not been on the same page, and you can't help but wonder what's going on there.
Yeah, Prop Rep, I think, is another one. I mean, he went into that debate and got his butt kicked by Andrew Wilkinson, who knew the file better than he did. This came a few days after Melanie Mark completely blundered a global question. Tell us why Prop Rep is actually good, and a softball question that she couldn't answer. You think he would have been like, Melanie, this is what you answer, the 5 things, right, or 3 things. Is John Horgan not doing his homework, or is it just Horgan being Horgan,
or maybe the briefing materials aren't up to snuff, or maybe they're doing a very poor job anticipating what seems like obvious questions and issues in retrospect. Who knows?
How can an old staffer blame staff? Come on, Clay.
Well, it's
always the politician's fault when you're a staffer.
That's true. It's always the politician's fault. Except when you're a politician, it's always a staffer. And of course, now it's always the media's fault.
That's right. Or it's a disgruntled staffer who only worked for us for 6 weeks and then we fired her. Don't call her a whistleblower. Oh, sorry, that was...
Yes. Well, we can't call her a whistleblower because then the SLAPP law will take effect.
Well, yeah, and I actually think that this woman has quite a case under the SLAPP law, and I think there are lawyers looking to test this law, and I'm sure they're reaching out to her on this one as well. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if you're following this issue at all, I think there's a sense, probably a hope, to be honest, that this would sort of resolve itself while we're all still sitting here in Victoria. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is going to drag out lingering into the summer because there's going to be more stuff coming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And certainly, if this woman has any friends she worked with in that office, anything like that, any colleagues, anyone else who's unhappy with Jinny, it's all going to come out. Okay, on the Orca. On the Orca and being flamed on social media is a piece by one Jordan Bateman. I hate talking about the real estate stuff because there is this small but vocal minority on Twitter who just refuses to allow anything other than foreign speculation or foreign money laundering to take any of the blame for real estate prices in British Columbia. And if you dare to suggest that anything other than that or anything on top of that helped contribute to the rise in costs, you get flamed on Twitter. Now, fortunately, I've muted most of them over the years because I find them crazy and appalling, and I'm willing to debate, but like no name calling, please. I'm not allowed to call you names. Why are you allowed to call me names? I don't understand that. However, I did way back into this. I wrote a piece looking at the money laundering report, the 5% increase that apparently, according to the formula, is what's driven up real estate prices due to money laundering. And I pointed out 4 other things that drove up prices as much or more than 5% that we don't have public inquiries in. Taking 20% of the land in the Lower Mainland and designating it agricultural land in 1975. We don't talk about that and the effect on prices. We don't talk about the GST, 5% on new houses. We don't talk about the property transfer tax and how it's embedded over and over again in all of these different transactions that go on. Land that can transfer hands 3, 4, 5 times before it finally ends up in the final home buyer's possession. Again, adding up costs. All the different fees, regulations, and levies. All these different things that have driven up costs as much or more than money laundering. But apparently, I am some sort of monster for not demonizing the money launderers enough. So, I would like to say, Maclean on the record, I do not stand with money launderers. There's the door. Get out, money launderers. But other things also contribute to the rise in prices.
Well, that was the thing. I read all those responses too because most of them tagged the Orca, and so many of them were accusing you of saying you're denying that money laundering exists. You did no such thing.
I'm a money laundering denier.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's I debated wading into it, but I like you. It's just kind of a waste of time for most of the.
Thanks for the defense, editor.
At no point did if you're listening and if you got angered by what you read about Jordan's piece, at no point did Jordan say there is no money laundering in British Columbia and it's not a problem. All he did was say there are other factors that are the reason that your condo or the condo you want to buy or the house you'll never buy are so expensive, and they range from things that frankly I hadn't even thought about, like the agricultural land preserve, to things like the fact that we're not Saskatoon. And people want to live here.
Well, and I should have had a fifth point, which was tariffs. Steel tariffs and tariffs on whatnot. And then I could blame Trump. And then I could add a whole bunch of other people flaming me as well for blaming Trump for our high prices. Like, it is what it is. Listen, like, there are lots of factors here, and money laundering is one for sure. I'm just saying, like, if we're looking at a condo in Vancouver where 40% of the cost now is taxes, fees, regulations, and levies, not including the land bump because of the ALR, maybe we should have a broader discussion than just the 5% that's being caused by the evil launderers. So
I couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more. Anything else on the Orca that you're especially fond of these days?
Well, Jody Vance wrote a good piece this morning, urging the BCTF and NDP to just reach a deal. And I think there were a lot of people who thought that the BCTF would play a little nicer with the NDP, or that the NDP would just give the BCTF what they say they've been wanting. But I mean, as both of them have discovered, it's a lot different when you're the one signing the checks.
I'm gonna do my impression of Education Minister Rob Fleming answering questions about this in question period. Your 16 years have caused this fact that we can't negotiate a deal. 16 years of underfunding has caused this. Never mind the fact that our offer actually mimics what your 16 years did. That's our education minister clearly has lost the plot.
Well, I mean, and it's and Jody's quite right to look at this from the point of view of a parent with a child. Is that the labor disruptions are not just a disruption for the teachers. And it is for them. Let's not dismiss that. But for the parents and for the kids, it's just crippling. And we don't want to go through what we went through a couple of years ago. And I mean, the sad fact is that we have a long history of labor disputes in education in this province, and it honestly doesn't matter which party's in government.
Yeah, you know what? We all know it's going to end up in Vince Reddy's lap. He's going to have to negotiate the deal. Like, why don't we just hire him from the beginning with the Teachers Federation? Like, I'd like to see a government come out and say, you know what? The Teachers Federation fought with the NDP. They fought with the BC Liberals. They fought with the NDP before that. They fought with the SoCreds. I'm sure they fought with the CC or whoever was before the SoCreds, the Conservatives. They fight with everyone. We're just going to come out. Let's just get Vince Reddy on the job day one, and let's just save ourselves let's just put him on retainer once every 5 years to negotiate this deal.
That's it exactly.
Yeah. So there you go. I'm trying to think of what else I read on the there was a piece he picked up from the Troy Media. Who's the author on that?
I'm gonna get in trouble because I never pronounce his last name right, but Michael Taube, I think it is.
Yeah. Really interesting piece on Jody and Jane Philpott. May I call you Jody?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. He is. I mean, I encourage you to read it, but he's sort of looking at. We talked about them rejecting Elizabeth May, and he's sort of looking past the next election and wondering if they have a long game, and they may not, but if they have a long game, it might be waiting out Justin Trudeau, because both of them have been pretty clear that their objection is not with the Liberal Party collectively; it's with the leadership right now. Yeah,
I love the federal Liberals. It's such a Game of Thrones kind of leadership, right? There's always someone in the shadows, sharpening the knife, waiting to plunge it in. And you can bet if Trudeau loses this election, the Kingslayers will step up, and off he goes.
Having been there, I can tell you, yes, that is the case.
Mark Carney now is being rumored as the next one, which is great for the Conservatives because they just recycle all the just visiting ads and stuff like that. It'll be great.
Yeah, Michael Ignatieff, I guess, was not available this time.
I also want to mention one more thing, Maclean. This one cracks me up. So our ICBA president, Chris Gardner, has an op-ed on the Orca, but also in the province newspaper. But the province ran my picture with Chris Gardner's op-ed. Chris Gardner
really? I
just
haven't
got
seen
a whole
that.
bunch better looking right there. So,
wow. This will be the
news.
last hot stove with Jordan Bateman before his unfortunate firing later this week.
Good news for Chris Gardner. You're better looking now, buddy. All right. That's it for us on the hot stove. We'll be back next week. Session will be over. Maclean will be jonesing to talk about politics because he been 3 days without anyone around.
Withdrawal. That's right.
All that good stuff. Actually, next week I may need to move it to Tuesday or Thursday, but we will figure that out. At the Orca BC on Twitter, facebook.com/the Orca BC. Have a great week.